This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You Are Special. Now, we talk about the maze. The maze is life. We're all going to go through it from the time we're born until we die. And as you're going through the maze, some of us get a little bit more confused at times. We're not sure what we should do. And sometimes we'll just sit down there and hit our head up against the wall. When my son was 18 months old, very neurotypical, I started noticing that when he was tired or confused about what was going on around him, he'd sit on the floor and pound his head. I took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, Karen, stop worrying about this. When it hurts, he'll stop." Well, he did stop when it hurt, but he would go back and do it again. It wasn't until almost 5 years later that he was diagnosed on the spectrum. Now he's high functioning, and for a lot of people, they don't like using that word, but he looks and acts very neurotypical, except when the brain misfires or fires in his way. I'm so excited about my guest today because my guest understands this. His name is Murphy Monroe. And Murphy, it was 40 years before you were diagnosed. So how did you handle the first 40 years of your life?
Awesome. Yeah. So first of all, it's just so great to be here, and I love your show, and I'm excited to be able to talk to your audience. Um, I was told at about the age of 15, 16, something like that, that I had Asperger's. It meant nothing to me. It really meant nothing to my parents. And I just didn't really do much to ever think about it. I did, though, from the earliest age I can possibly remember, know that I was different in a concrete way. I really have no memories where it wasn't clear to me that I was experiencing things differently than everybody else was, that people around me were relating to each other in a way that I just wasn't, I just wasn't part of. But I didn't really think too much about it. In my mind, it was a big secret. I was different and didn't want anyone to know. And so I just really hid it as a secret, and tried my best to pretend all of the things that came along with being an autistic kid, a whole lot of stimming, and just a lot of overwhelm. I just did my best to hide those things so that nobody would know, nobody would suspect. I don't think I was particularly good at hiding them, but that's what I was doing. I was working really hard to hide everything. I'm hyperverbal as opposed to verbal, excuse me, which is, part of the spectrum. We are all one end or the other. And so as a kid, I was a little professor, and was able to use that to hide as well. So then somewhere around early 20s, I had a therapist ask me if I thought I was autistic. And I didn't think much about it right away. But a couple of months later, I ran into somehow one of Temple Grandin's book, Life in Pictures. And I read it. And when I read it, it just was instant. I was on an airplane, and I had never identified with something quite so much. And so, but again, big secret. Didn't want anyone to know, only me. Would be awful if people knew about this. I had a big job. I was a senior administrator at a college, and last thing I wanted was for people there to think that. At that part of my life, I was going through the end of my first marriage, and also in those circumstances didn't want anybody to know because of custody, and didn't want anybody to know or think that I was meaningfully different. So then let's fast forward now to, about 10 years ago, when really ultimately it was social media and people on social media who were adults talking about the process of unmasking. And it hit me that that was me. And so I just started to make autism one of my special interests, and learning as much as I could. And when I decide I want to learn something about something, well, watch out. And so that point, I decided I would go in and get myself in a diagnosis. I just thought, it would feel good for me if I could just have someone look me in the eye who knew. And so I went through a diagnosis, and several weeks of testing and interviews and everything else. But when I got in front of the excellent Dr. Jessica Myazik, who's here in the Chicago area, she just said to me before we even got into anything, she just looked at me and said, "Hey, Murphy, like, you must know you're autistic." And that was it. I just immediately felt a relief, and my life pivoted. I just was clear to me I couldn't pretend anymore.
I like the word that you used. It was a relief, because now you could really be you. You could be Murphy. You didn't have to hide it. I know that's how my husband felt when he got diagnosed. He had gone back to grad school and he was doing excellently. He was working full time, going to grad school. And he said to me one day, "There's something different. Like, this is all like, I'm catching on." And I said, "But you've always been like that." And he goes, "No, this is just different." And then he went to take a test and he sat there and he couldn't do it. So he went up to the instructor afterwards and he said, "I'm thinking about the time."
Yeah.
And he realized that's why he didn't do well the first time he went to college, because the timing, that's all he would think about. Oh, I have 20 minutes. Oh, now I only have 15 minutes.
Right. And there's 17 questions left. And I get that. Yeah.
So the instructor was absolutely wonderful. And he said to him, first thing he said was, "Do you have ADHD?" He goes, "I don't know." He said, "But my son is on the autism spectrum." And he said, "We're going to put this test on hold. Can you get in to see your doctor? Let's get a diagnosis." So he actually went to see our son's neurologist. And the neurologist said within the first 5 minutes, "Rich, you didn't know you were on the spectrum."
Right.
And he said, "But I'm not like my son." He said, "Oh, yes, you are." And the two of them have always gone head to head.
Yeah.
And because they are so exactly alike, but yet they don't understand each other. The other thing that I love about what you're talking about, and I'm hoping this audience gets this, you are living a normal life. You got married, you had kids, you went through a divorce like so many of us. Not, you have to be autistic to get a divorce, okay? So there is no specific look or action that can identify if you're on the spectrum, because it includes so many different things. And we all take upon those characteristics differently. So what was it like when you got diagnosed and now you can go back to your family and say, "Hey, guess what, everybody? Maybe odd, but I'm odd in a good way."
Yeah. It was really hard. It's one of the hardest things about late diagnosis, is because we've all been masking. We've all been working really hard, even whether we knew it or not. We've been working really hard to hide traits. And so I have so many traits that I just worked so hard to hide, to push down. And it's exhausting. It's really tiring. I was running scripts in my head constantly without knowing, just like that script about the time left that you're in the test that your husband was running. I'm also running multiple scripts in my head at all time. They're essentially translations, because I'm trying to figure out how I can translate my experience into what everybody else seems to be experiencing. And so this is really what I said to my kids and my family, is that I've been pretending that things are a lot easier for me than they are. And not just like pretending now, but I've really always been pretending. And it's a strange thing to be 40 years old and sort of realize that maybe I don't really know exactly how I am, because I've never had a chance to just try to be naturally. And that's becoming my goal now. My goal now, I said to my kids, is to figure out how I can pretend less and less, and how I can really get to a place where I'm my natural self and I can be calm. I can be, I can be more fun. I can be more accessible, and most importantly, I can be my best self, because that's what you need as a dad. And I really worked hard to reassure them that, the things will change. I may change, but like the fundamentals of our relationship and the core love that we have and the deep knowing of each other we have doesn't change.
Right.
Um, and it's been a journey. It hasn't been easy on either of them. I have a 22-year-old, and she's a lot more verbal and willing to talk about these things. She's also very sensitive. And so the 15-year-old is a 15-year-old. He's in high school, and I know he feels these things. I know he knows these things. I know he has a heart of empathy for me. And then, of course, he has his own world of ways that it impacts him that are hard, complicated. Um, but he's a lot less verbal about it, of course. My wife is just incredibly kind and loving and loves me and has loved me more and more every step along this journey. And so I'm really lucky that way. It's not easy on her, at all. There's all sorts of, um, about maybe a few weeks ago, she realized there was a bunch of friend groups, couple groups of ours that were getting together that we weren't part of. We weren't invited to. And that's not a super common thing that she's used to. But anyway, she was saying to me, like, why? Like, why do you think we weren't invited? And I said to her, it's because I'm autistic. It's because they know I'm autistic. It's because they either think it's too much for me, or they think I won't be there, or I maybe just all sorts of complicated reasons. But that's very likely why. And when Sarah sat with that, and I think realized that, oh, that likely is the case. It really, I think, opened up it opened up for her a line of empathy towards me, and a line of sort of understanding that we're in this together.
Right.
And so she's been a partner the whole way. And she's always known. I have really bad light sensitivity, really bad. And she's always been the one who like dimmed the lights before I came into the room, or like turned my body a little bit so I wasn't facing towards the sun. I mean, she's always been my,
Sure.
um, yeah. And I've been lucky to have a family who's come along with it like I have.
So you were the first time that you were diagnosed with Asperger's. That's before Asperger's really came under the umbrella of autism, and then they got rid of the name Asperger's, which makes no difference. It is what it is. But you were 15 years old. When was it in the timeline? I mean, my son was diagnosed in 1996.
Yep.
He was one out of 150 people on the spectrum, but he was considered Asperger's. And then within 10 years, they said to us, oh no, now he's autistic. And it was like, no, he's Alex. That's who he is.
Yep. Yep.
So what year was this when you got diagnosed?
Likely around 1990.
Okay.
My father was a school superintendent, and so he had access to all sorts of experts. I was a really different kid. And so from a pretty young age, my parents were regularly having me tested for learning disabilities, different kinds of things. I was seeing therapists at a very young age, and only because I had these like progressive educated parents who
Yes.
could tell that there was something special in there, but knew also that they just knew things were hard for me. And so it was a colleague of my dad who was a psychiatrist who first said the word Asperger's. And yeah, I wasn't thinking autism in my head. And to be honest, I was mostly thinking I don't want to know about it. I was mostly thinking, like, now that it has a name, it's an even bigger secret.
Yeah.
Is really how my mind was working.
Well, being a 15-year-old, that has to be difficult as well. You already know you're different. Now somebody's giving you a diagnosis, and now you have to live with that label.
Yeah.
And I hate labels, but that's a whole other podcast.
It's complicated.
Yes, it is. Before we got on air, I had asked you about what's been going on in the news. Robert F. Kennedy, for some reason, he believes that autism is a disease. It is not a disease. It's a neurological, I'm not going to say disorder. It's a neurological order.
It's a neurotype.
Okay. That's a good way of putting it. And we all have little things that make us different. But he wants to go ahead and label anybody who has been diagnosed, and maybe go ahead and diagnose more people, and put them on this registry. And when my son first heard about it, he's 34 years old. He's working in an industry that he's always wanted. He's in the sports industry. He's living away from home. He's on his own. Unless he tells somebody that he's on the spectrum, they don't know.
Yep.
They notice that he has some quirks, but hey, I've got a lot of quirks myself. So when he heard about it, he called home and he was scared. And he said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Go on living the way you've been living. First of all, there's going to be a lot of uproar about this. Secondly, I don't know what a registry is going to do other than try to isolate people who are on the spectrum. And I think if we try to do that, I think this will be the majority of our population, because I think we all have some of these different issues going on." How did you react? And I know that you work now in the spectrum of helping others. What was your reaction?
Well, I mean, I've been aware of his thinking on this for a long time, and I think it's when Trump was elected, and then when he was confirmed, it really was just, to me, out of all of the awful things going on, it's, to me, and these are my own politics, forgive me, but it was the biggest gut punch, and the thing that I thought was just, and so my view on it, one, I think the purpose of the registry ultimately is so they can make sure to be able to do all of the research necessary to identify autism in utero. And so that's ultimately, we're talking about eugenics. I think that's ultimately what's happening here, is an attempt to eliminate autism. Now, having listened to RFK quite a bit be interviewed about this over the years, when he's talking about autism, he's talking about low functioning autism. And again, I know you mentioned labels earlier, and it's a good thing to mention, because I really don't like labels either, because I would get labeled as high functioning. But man, people, that really doesn't tell you any kind of story about the life. And then also, I think those labels refer much more to how people perceive us than to how we perceive our own autism. And so that gets complicated too. But regardless, RFK is talking about nonverbal, partially nonverbal, voluntarily nonverbal. He's talking about people who are much more difficult to make a typical communication with,
Right.
people who seemingly are inaccessible because of communication gaps. I'm not saying they are, they're not, but it takes a different kind of savant skill than RFK will ever have or understand. And so I don't think he's talking about your son, and he's not talking about me or your husband. He's talking about a vision he has in his head. And to me, that's almost what makes it worse, because we're now talking about, we're talking about folks with autism, talking about a protected minority class. We are also now going to take the most vulnerable part of that group. We're going to take the most vulnerable 10%. So let's say 3% of us are autistic, and now 10% of that group we're going to take, who are the most vulnerable. And that's what he's talking about, and that's what he is trying to eliminate. And to me, that's what makes it so awful. This is the most vulnerable group. And the truth is that when savant skills appear in autism, and they don't always, but when savant skills appear in autism, they disproportionately appear on what we call the low functioning end of the spectrum. And we may not know that or understand that because there isn't a voice and a whole bunch of words in order to get it out, or a typical communication to get it out. But autism is necessary for evolution. And that means that those who sort of embody the most autistic traits, it's hard language to talk about this, so forgive me, but for those who embody the most autistic traits, likely those are the ones who have the most answers. And those are the ones for whom we need as guideposts. And so I really, just right now talking about it, I can feel it in my gut. I can feel like a real sense of fear and anger about it. Autism is not a disease. Autism, I think of as a neurotype. I feel like you are autistic, like you are gay. It's just how you are born. It's how your particular being was wired. There's nothing one can do about it. And there's nothing pejorative about it in any way. It's just like a fabulous way of being. And so I always prefer telling people that I am autistic, not that I have autism, because I really see it that way for myself. I don't think RFK will be successful. He's already admitted he's missing his, 6-month, deadline or whatever. He's got his hands into a whole bunch of other things. But what he is going to be successful in is changing the narrative for a whole lot of people.
I hope so.
And we'll see what happens. I don't like the idea of young autistic people who have parents that are in say red states and are now learning about this in a way that's not true and not real, and learning about it through their parents' eyes, which is the worst way, because we take what our parents tell us, and it's gospel. Right. And so I worry a lot for those kids in that part of the equation. But I don't think that the long-term story on autism will have anything to do with RFK.
Well, and the interesting part is when my son turned, I think it was 18, he decided that he wanted to become a public speaker. And so he went to numerous schools and organizations and talked about being on the spectrum. And he was often asked the question, if somebody handed you a pill today that would take your autism away, would you take it? And his answer always has been absolutely not. I am who I am, and I'm proud of it. Like you, he didn't quite mask it, but he kept trying to prove himself to everybody along the way.
Yes.
Accept me, I'm okay. And there were certain things he couldn't do in high school, not because he couldn't do it, but the school and his peers didn't allow him to do it.
Yep.
And luckily, his wonderful neurologist said to us one day, when Alex turns 25, you're going to notice a difference. And I looked at him and I said, really? Like there's a magic number.
Right.
And he said, believe me, I've seen it. And almost to his 25th birthday, we started to see his maturity come in.
Yeah.
More acceptance of who he was, realizing, hey, if you don't want to be my friend, then I don't need to be your friend. I'm not going to be mean, but I don't need to be your friend.
Yep.
And his whole value in life became, I've got to be the best person I can be. And when I started coaching because of him. And I coach with families who have someone on the spectrum or some sort of disability. And I tell them they've got to treat each other in the way that you would if somebody had Alzheimer's. And how do you do that? You meet them where they are. And once I started doing that with my son and my husband, life is so much easier.
I believe it.
It's easier for them and it's easier for me.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for your wife that she had to see that, here you guys have been social and all of a sudden you're being left out.
Right.
It happens. We have to find that new social circle sometimes.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
So tell me what it is you actually are doing now to help other families, because this, I think, is the most exciting thing.
Yeah, so I'm really lucky. I live in Evanston, Illinois, which is a city of about 80,000, just outside of Chicago. And I serve as a commissioner for aging and disabilities. And what that means is it's an appointed position where I lead a committee whose purpose is to hold the city accountable for meeting Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, and also for working with local businesses to help them make their businesses as accessible as possible. And so I've been doing this for a few years now and have learned a tremendous amount and have really been able to hold the city's feet to the fire in a way that hasn't been done before. And so I've been able to gather together a really significant and meaningful group of disabled folks around town, really representing a real diversity of disabilities, who we've been able to not only bring together, but bring together in such an inclusive way that voices are really being heard, or voices aren't being heard, voices are being read. And everybody is getting in. And this type of feedback and inclusion we've done has created momentum for us. And so the city council, the mayor, city manager are all now focused and interested in serving the disability community in a way we haven't seen in quite a while before here. And so, as an example, we have I think we have 6 recreational centers in town, and 4 of those 6 now have sensory rooms in them. And, we now have active plans for all of our buildings to get towards being fully ADA compliant. And I think best, we've developed a culture where we have all of these businesses reaching out to us and saying, like, hey, my place isn't very accessible because I rent it and my landlord doesn't want to make any changes, but boy, I would like to be more accessible. What can you all do to help me? And just creating all these conversations in our town, not defensive, just trying to figure out how we can make as many things more accessible as possible, just chipping away at it.
I love that.
Yeah, it's been a joy.
And the other thing that I'm hoping people are hearing, and it's taken me a long time, when you talk about somebody with a disability, you got to remember they have abilities. So the disability may be they're in a wheelchair and they can't get in and out, but they have a brain, they have thoughts, their hands work, they can do jobs, they can have conversations, they can be part of the system.
Yes.
Like, when I first started wearing hearing aids, I worked in a very young culture college, and everybody knew that I was 15 years older than all of them, but they didn't act like that around me. But the day I started wearing hearing aids, um, I had to tell people I can't hear whispers.
Mm.
So if you're coming to whisper something to me, close my door and talk to me. Don't, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was missing a lot of things. And this happened progressively for a couple of years. And finally, I went to HR and I said, number one, I need a different phone because I'm having a hard time on the phone. Number two, can we please have a discussion about whispers? So instead, what they did, they said to me, Karen, this must be really wearing you down. Why don't you take medical leave? And I remember sitting in the HR office just crying because what are you telling me? You don't want to do these things. And I had found all the law in Ohio, what they had to do. And they said, well, we're not going to do that.
Mm.
And I said, so you don't care about me? And they said, well, no, that's why you're going on medical leave.
Oh,
I went on medical leave, but within 2 days, they told me I had deserted my job.
oh my God.
And to me, I don't think about wearing hearing aids as a disability. When I take them out, that's a disability because I can't hear. But with them in, sure, there are some limitations, but even people who don't wear hearing aids have limitations.
Yes.
All I was asking for was just let's bring it out in the open. Let's
Right.
figure out a way how to work around it. I have since learned that I'm not the only one who sort of got booted out of the door that way. And we have students with disabilities as well. And it scares me when I see a community who says, we don't have to deal with that. If you don't like it here, go somewhere else. I love what you're doing in
Thanks.
Illinois.
Thanks. Appreciate that. It's out there everywhere. The both people doing good work and also a lot of ignorance is out there everywhere. And yeah, just gotta keep fighting. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's a really awful situation.
It
And
was, but
and
the
and
best thing that happened for me, and so I want my listeners to understand this, I was just turning 60. And my thought was, who's going to hire me now? What am I going to do? So I went into a state of depression. I have to admit that. Luckily, great family around me, doctors, said, it's okay to be depressed. This is what happened to you. We walked through it. And I sat down one day and I said to my husband, I know what I want to do. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want a blog and I want a podcast. Now, this is 15 years ago. So, yeah, there were podcasters, but they were people who really knew what they were doing, right?
Totally.
And he said, what do you need? And I Googled it and I said, oh, I need a soundboard. I need microphones. I need headsets. He went out and got it all. I don't use any of that stuff anymore. Computers are just great. But he said, do you know what you're going to do with all this? I said, no, but I'm going to figure it out. And that was the time that I realized, I don't care how old you are, what your disability is. You got to find out what your ability is and go for that. And
yes.
I've seen you do. That's exactly what you did. And I'm glad you don't have to mask anymore. Although I'm sure there's some people that maybe you still feel that you have to.
For sure. And even right now, I'm working on sitting still this entire interview and keeping my head focused on you, right? It's in my mind the whole time, right?
Yeah, it's difficult for me too. In fact, I do this regular podcast on Tuesday with two other gentlemen. It's called What in the World? And it's real news, but it's odd news, okay? And for some reason, that whole show, if you go to watch it, I'm moving around. And last night, the host of the show texted me afterwards and he said, were you okay yesterday? And I said, I don't know what was going on. I said, I just was fidgety.
Yeah.
And that's why, I don't have a diagnosis, but I know certain things about me. I know I'm ADHD.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact. Give me something to read, and if I think I know it, I have to skim through it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't read it.
Sure.
If
Sure.
it's
Sure.
something that I don't know, I have to force myself to read through it. So we all have something
Yep.
going on.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
How can my listeners follow you? Do you have a blog? Do you have a website? Do you have something that they could
Sure.
learn more
Yeah.
about Murphy?
I do. I have a website. It's my name, murphymonroe.com, MurphyMonroe. There you can just learn about me, learn about my work. I do a whole bunch of interesting things, but what I really want to be doing is educating on autism. I do a fair amount of public speaking. And I've also had a lot of fun doing audits with organizations on environmental audits, on workplaces related to supporting their neurodiverse employees. Anyone who wants to learn more about that can do so on my website. But to be honest, anyone who just wants to reach out because they want to connect or have something for me, I'm genuinely interested in. I know you have a really smart and interesting audience, and so I'm really happy to be able to talk to you and be in front of them.
This was wonderful. And I have to thank podmatch.com because I wouldn't have found Murphy probably without them. It's interesting. I've been with them, I think, 3 years. And I had somebody that I was supposed to interview last week, and she had dropped Podmatch. And I said, why? And she goes, I don't know. And I said, you and I wouldn't have met without it. And she had such a fun time being on the podcast. I said, you got to rejoin.
Yep.
I said, because you're meeting people that you normally aren't going to meet. And
Absolutely.
I have a son that lives in Chicago, and I could possibly have met you somewhere along the
That's
line.
right.
But you know what? This is so much easier. So
Great.
thank you for
It's
being
excellent.
with me. And
thank you so much.
you're welcome. Best of luck. Bye-bye now.